Hello friends, in our previous lesson we downloaded Android Studio to our computer and installed it. But the installation process is not completely finished yet. In this lesson we will complete the SDK installations. So if you're ready, let's start. First, let's find the Android Studio app we downloaded from the search bar. When we type Android Studio here, we can find the application we downloaded. Okay, as you can see, we found the app. Now I click on the Open option so we can open the application. If you notice, a window called Import Android Studio Settings popped up. If you already have Android Studio installed on your computer, you can directly transfer the settings there. But since we are going to install Android Studio for the first time, we choose the Do Not Import Settings option. I click the OK button. As you can see, a window in the form of an Android Studio Setup Wizard has popped up. Now we can start the installation. I click the Next button. Here we come across two different options, Standard Installation and Custom Installation. You can complete the necessary installation procedures by choosing the Standard Installation from there. But I want to show you all the steps in the installation process, so I will choose the Custom option. I click the Next button again. On this page, it asks us to select the JDK, i.e. Java Development Kit location. This kit comes embedded with Android Studio. Actually, there's no need for the JDK installation that we did in the previous lesson, but we still want the updated JDK file to be on our computer. If we want to use a different IDE instead of Android Studio, you must have a JDK on your computer. We download the JDK and make our computer ready to write code just in case. That's why we choose the Embedded JDK option here. I click the Next button again. Here we can choose the theme of the interface we will code. There are two different options, Darkula and Light. I usually prefer the Light mode. You can also change these settings later. I click the Next button again. On this page, we will do the necessary procedures for the installation of the SDK, that is, the Software Development Kit. As you can see here, Android SDK Platform, Performance, and Android Virtual Device. All three different options. At this point, it is worth noting that we can test the applications we make in Android Studio on virtual devices offered to us by Android Studio. The settings here are generally related to the performance of this virtual device. I suggest you choose all the options here. Otherwise, you may encounter some problems. But if you notice, Android Virtual Device cannot be selected right now. Doesn't matter, we can install it later. If you can choose it, choose it. Just below, we need to specify the SDK location. I usually set these locations as default. You can save it to any folder you want. I click the Next button again. On this page for the emulator, we can set the RAM size we will allocate. In general, we can use the size suggested here. While your emulator is running, the size you set here will be used from your RAM. Of course, when you close the emulator, your RAM will continue to run at its old size. Without changing anything, I click the Next button. This page also lists the settings we have made so far. If there is any setting that we want to change, you can return to the pages where we made the relevant settings by clicking the previous button. If you are not going to make any changes, if you confirm all the settings, we can complete the installation. I click the Next button again. On this page, we have to accept a license agreement for the components which will be installed. I select all of them and click the Accept button. Okay, everything is ready for installation. I start the installation by clicking the Finish button. As you can see, the installation has started. You must have an active internet connection during the installation phase. Otherwise, you cannot make a healthy installation. This process may take a while. For this reason, I stop the screen recording at this point, and when the installation is complete, we will continue where we left off. All right, guys, the installation is complete. I click the Finish button. Okay, so we've successfully completed the installation of Android Studio. Let's take a short break here, and in the next video, we will create our first project in Android Studio. So I'll see you in the next video. When we completed the installation, we encountered this window. To create a new project or open an existing project in Android Studio more precisely, this will be the first screen we will encounter every time we open Android Studio. Now we can create a new project. Here, I choose the New Project option. From this page, we will choose a template for the Android project we will create. First, let's take a look at the different tabs here. As you know, the Android operating system is used not only in phones and tablets, but also in watches, televisions, cars, and in different areas. On which device type you want the application to work, you need to choose a template suitable for the relevant device. Since we will develop applications for tablets and phones, we will use the Phone and Tablet tab. There are many different templates in this tab. Android Studio offers us some ready-made templates so that we can get faster results for the projects we will do. Since we developed the projects from the beginning, we will always choose the Empty Views Activity template. And press the Next button. From this page that opens, we will configure the project we will create. If you want, let's make the necessary definitions. First, I will specify the name of my project. Here, you can write any name you want. At the same time, the name you write here will be the name of your application. For now, I'm writing My First Project. The second field is the field where we specify the package name of our project. You can think of the package name as the ID of your application. Generally, project package names are created as com.anything.application name. If you leave this as the example, you cannot publish your application on Google Play, my friends, because Google accepts the expression example as a sample work and does not allow it to be published on Google Play. Therefore, if you work for a company, you can write special expressions such as company name or your own surname. I leave it as the example for now, because for now I will not publish the application anywhere. The third field here is the file path where our project will be saved. You can save your project in any folder you want on your computer. For example, let's create a new folder under the Android Studio Projects folder. Let the name of this folder be Java Projects. Also, you can change the file path just by clicking here. It will open the computer file browser. Notice that there are / and project name at the end of the file path. If you change the file path, don't forget to add / and project name to the end of the new file path. Otherwise, you cannot save your project. In the fourth part, we need to choose the programming language that we will use in our project. We will build our applications using the Java programming language. That's why I choose the Java language. The fifth part is the minimum SDK part. In other words, in this section, we determine from which version of Android we want the applications we will make to run. As you know, Android is constantly releasing new versions, like Android 10, Android 11, and Android 12. From this section, we can determine the minimum Android level that the applications we will make will work. For example, if we choose Android 8, the application we will make will also work on Android 8, Android 9, Android 10, Android 11, and Android 12. So the version you choose refers to the minimum Android version. If you notice, when I choose any version, Android Studio tells us just below what percentage of Android devices this application will run. If you're going to publish your app on Play Store, you can choose a lower Android version from the section. Of course, at this point, I also need to point out the following. Since some codes are updated with each new version of Android, choosing the lowest Android version can sometimes cause problems. That's why I generally choose API Level 23. Of course, we can change these settings later, friends. You can choose any version as we are currently doing sample projects. And the last part for the configuration language. In the previous version of the Android Studio, this was set by default, but in new versions, we have the right to choose it. To explain this briefly, the Android build system compiles app resources and source code and packages them into APKs, or Android app bundles that you can test, deploy, sign, and distribute. So we need to specify a language for structuring our projects. At this point, it is recommended to choose Kotlin DSL. You can also choose Groovy instead. This is not a step that will affect our project development in the first degree, friends. As a result, I choose the Kotlin DSL option from here. Now we can create our first project by clicking the Finish button. Since we created a project in Android Studio for the first time, it still does some downloads. I think this will be short. Let's wait a bit. Okay, the downloads are complete. I click Finish. And yes, now the creation process of the project has begun. Of course, the creation of the first project may take a long time. Also, you may encounter an assistant like this when any innovation or update is made in Android Studio. You can review this document. You can also close this window by clicking the Assistant tab here, or you can close it with this minimize icon. In the bottom right part of the interface, we see an expression of the build processes of the project. Here, friends, we should not take any action before we see the completion of the project. Otherwise, you may encounter some problems in your projects. Again, by opening the Build tab here, we can see whether the project is completed or not. When the project is completed or any error is encountered, you can see these processes in this section. The process of creating the project may take some time. That's why I'm stopping the screen recording right now. When the project is completed, we can continue where we left off. All right, my friends, as you can see, our project has been created. So far, we've installed Android Studio and created our first project. Let's take a short break here. In the next lesson, we'll go over Android Studio's interface. So I'll see you in the next lesson.